And it is a privilege to share the next part of this series in James, verse by verse. And just a short little confession. Tim checked up on me last Wednesday, and I didn't see his message till Thursday, and I was like, man, this thing is so short. But I was like, and you feel guilty about that because of expectations and all that. And so I'm like, man, I'm very concerned about this. But it all worked out. Have you seen the sovereignty of God just play out? We had a little bit of a issue where we had to change some things and move things around, and everything's worked out. So it's by, we might try to guide our own steps, but it's God who really directs them. So that was just a reminder I had today. So let's just dive into it. It's James chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. It says this: "Don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. God alone, who gave you the law, is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor?" Now, a quick glance, we see in James 11, he uses the phrase, speaking against each other. That means slander. So you could say, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. And just this interpretation happened to broke it down. However, other translations will use slander in its place. You also see a lot of judging going on. And who is judging? I think it's interesting to note we naturally love justice. Our natural nature is to want revenge or some type of payment in return if we've been wronged. This doesn't always mean in a monetary payment. However, most of our society has become a sue-happy nation. Liability means walk in complete perfection, or you will suffer the consequences. Perhaps the more prosperous you are, the more you're going to have to pay, because I'm going to take, so you suffer the consequences. We love justice. In fact, TV plays it out. You may be familiar with Judge Judy and her one pungent lines, and people enjoy that. In my lifetime, you had the People's Court with Judge Wapner, and they made a big scene out of it. They'd interview the guys after the cases and all that. It's interesting to note in our political world today, you hear the phrase unjust judge. With all the tariffs, with all the executive orders happening, that's the phrase you hear. Did they overstep their bounds? And in doing so, the media says, well, they're overset, so they're an unjust judge. So the title of my sermon is called The Unjust Judge. But first, I want to share with you about slander and judging others. So when we come back to James 4, 11 and 12, you'll have a better understanding of what he's trying to say. Again, just to repeat, speaking against each other means slander. Maybe at one time you've been guilty of this. You've been wronged, mistreated, and a lot of thoughts bombard our minds. Why did this happen? And all these things happen to us. Suddenly, unresolved conflict begins to create us speaking out. And some of it is speculation, uncertainty, hurt, and just overwhelmed. At the time, it felt harmless, But then at the end, our words damaged relationship or something we cared about overall. And that's the dangers of slander. Slander comes alongside gossip and an untruthful tongue and unspeculation, a lot of uncertainty. However, as believers, we tend to miss this standard because most of us have done it. We like the category sin and say, it's a little sin. Everybody's done it. But that's the dangers, because we come so familiar with it that it loses its value. And we come accustomed to it because of social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. And words are just thrown out with little or no consequences. And when we get caught, we generally say, "Oh, my bad, you took my stuff out of context, you did this." We try to cover up a deeper issue. I think it's interesting to note that with slander, there's some fruits that the enemy likes to do. And if you experience slander, you might have seen some of these. The enemy wants to deaden and split churches, poison friendships, fracture families. He knows slander will definitely quench the Holy Spirit. It kills love, short circuits spiritual renewal. It also undermines trust and sucks the life out of, or courage out of the believer. And I think it's interesting to note that one of our commandments is about slander. In Exodus 20:16, we see that. If you could pull that up. It says, "You must not testify falsely against your neighbor." Now, that's just not referring to a court case. That's just speaking out a negative thing. That's not true. And the damage it causes. He reiterates it in Leviticus 19:16. He says this, "Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord." Now, it's interesting to note how the enemy tries to do. He tries to destroy community. And this is why God made these commands. And he's warning his people, hey, don't do this because it's going to divide you. And we know what the enemy does when he divides it. He ultimately wants to get you on an island. He wants to get you alone so he can pick you up, discourage you. Not only that, when slander really takes root, it goes after someone's character. And that is God tells us to protect our character and to put that in place. So, again, he just pulled it down, but at the end of 1916, and this may be just like me just reading into it a little bit more, but when we recognize slander, we shouldn't just let it go. We need to direct the person who's talking to us and ask the right questions when we hear it, because this can destroy someone who we love if we just let it go. And that's that. But in Proverbs 22:1, it says this: "Choose a good reputation over great riches, being held in high esteem. It is better than silver or gold." Slanders one attack character. At the end of the day, they want to discredit your character. And in doing so, what does it do? It quiets our voice. We lose our value within the community. Our reputation's gone. And as much as I hate to say it, oftentimes pastors who have fell, it's easy to jump on when they fell. It's easy to jump into slander because we don't know the whole story. And so they pile it on. And unfortunately, dare I say, the church tries to clean their hands of it, quiet everything, take all their stuff off, media, all the stuff they taught. It doesn't have no value. And I grieve by that, because it's like, look, they were a person of God. Their thing didn't change. The Holy Spirit didn't change because of something that exposed it. Yes, God can remove certain people in certain times. However, we pile it on. The church then hides everything, which opens the door for speculation, rumors to start. And in the end, what happens? We just pile it on. And we smear this guy. And instead of trying to restore this guy and allow God to work, we pretty much just pile it on and say, see you later. And we ultimately open the door for judgment. I think it's interesting what slander does and reveals in the heart of that person. Proverbs 26:28 says this: a lying tongue hates its victim, and a flattering word causes ruin. I got this from the Desiring God website, and it really put this together very well. It says, slander is indulgent because often what we seek is a self-flattery buzz of our listeners' approval and admiring us more than the one we are slandering. We are robbing another's reputation to get the drug of self-flattery. Proverbs 10:18 says this: hiding hatred makes you a liar. Slandering others makes you a fool. Slander is cowardly because the way it nurtures a concern or an offense and gaining sympathizers without doing the courageous work of being directly to the source of our concern or offense. Our rationalizations for this can be countless, but essentially we don't have the guts to deal with it head on. That means our character is in serious question, since we're willing to vandalize another person's character to gain allies. Slander has a very selfish ambition behind it, as you can see. And with that, you will find disorder and evil of every kind. In our study in James, we learned this in James 3:15 through 16. It says this: for jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. How very true that is. When we allow our selfishness, it opens the door for the enemy to work. Paul says this in Ephesians 4:30-31. He says this: and do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he was identified you as his own, guaranteeing you that you will be saved one day for redemption. But get rid of bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. We then see, actually Peter then says the same thing in 1 Peter 2:1. He says this. He says, so get rid of all evil behavior, being done with deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all kinds of other speech. Or in other words, slander. Don't use slander as speech. Get rid of it, because it's demonic. It's the way the enemy comes through. And so there we begin to see how slander, how we want justice. And so that's somehow how we pass judgment, is through slander, because we want payback. We want these things, and we want these things to begin to attack us. And so slander is not something we should just dismiss. As you can see the heart of the enemy at work and what he has done. I want to dive into judging others because you link these two together. And then again, we'll read into James here. Very familiar verse that we've all probably know in this room. It says Matthew in 7:1-3. It says this: do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is a standard by which you will be judged. And then I want to correlate that with Luke 6. It's just a different account, same passage, in Luke 6:37-42. Hear this out. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others, or it will all come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven. Give, and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, make room for more, running over, and poured into your lap. The amount you give determines the amount you give back. Then Jesus gave the illustration. Can one blind person feed another? Won't they both fall in a ditch? Students are not greater than their teachers, but the student who is fully trained will become like the teacher. And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't even see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Now, I think it's interesting to note, Jesus really dissects this on how we're to handle when we've been wronged. You know, if you've been placed in that, number one, he wants us to reflect on, he goes, like, I would never have thought this. When we've been mistreated, he wants us almost to evaluate, is this really true? Do I have this issue? Rather than get defensive and suddenly make a slanderous remark, start to judge, condemn. He's like, he wants you to take that moment and begin to say, is this really true? And then on top of that, he's like, well, what standard do you want to go by? You know, we create our own standards, but what standard do you want to go by? Do you want to follow the mercy and forgiveness, which he talks about in that passage? Or do you want instant justice? Instant justice. I want instant revenge. And we start to short circuit basically God's sovereignty and the way he judges and possibly miss it. And the thing of it is when we start judging, and he talks about the board in his eye, when we start judging, ultimately we do that based upon our own experiences, what we faced, and in doing so, we become unjust. We just start swinging around and speaking out, and we don't recognize the things that could be in our hearts, even though it might have been a true wrong. And in doing so, we start to do this. And when he starts to say, if you could pull up Luke, let's see where it is. Where he said, Luke 38, 6:38. If you could pull that back up. It says, give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you full, pressed down, shaken together, make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. Now, he's not talking about a monetary gift there. He's talking about forgiveness. He's bringing in forgiveness and mercy, and he's like, look, you know, we all know, like, I can make more room for mercy if I have something in a bucket here, or, we all had a trash can, and we push down all that stuff just so we can make room for more. And so he's trying to say here, like, look, show boundless mercy. Do everything in your power to walk in He's like, push that, push it down, make so much room, shake it, level it all off, to the point that it's running over. So in essence, when that season comes and your judgment comes toward you, people are going to show you mercy as well. And so it's kind of this thing of like, look, God, I want you to function in a place of mercy in this season, a place of, just pouring out forgiveness. So we allow that to happen because he's like, show endless. And he begins to say the next part where he says, one blind person lead another, and this is just my kind of interpretation. It's like we so often go to our friends for advice, and they're probably not always the best advice. And so the blind starts leading the blind. We choose a side. That's the easy thing to do. We want to choose side. We don't want to talk someone through, okay, what do you want me to do with this information? What do you want me to do with this? Do you want me to lead you to reconciliation? Do you want me to pray? We need to just start, and that's what he wants to do, because he knows that once we're offended, it opens the door for division and a bunch of caveat where he can pick you off. And so he's like, this is how you you get past this, is you start to forgive. You walk in forgiveness. You don't judge. And so what happens is, again, we ask the wrong people and they lead us down the wrong path. If they say, yeah, I understand, I'm going to bow it on too. So I'm going to just start speaking. And boom, boom, boom. And you see the slander of what it said before. It likes company. Offenses like company because we want to justify ourselves rather than to the person. And then ultimately he says, is the student greater than the teacher? So he's like saying, look, your way of handling these situations aren't my way. And so he wants you as the teacher to say, look, follow my example. Follow my example. I'm your teacher. You're not better than me. You don't know it better than me. You're going to be able to avoid a lot of pitfalls. It's not to say that there won't be a struggle during that season, but you can avoid a lot of pitfalls and just dig in a bigger, deeper ditch. And so I think it's important to realize that overall, because at the end of the day, we see this played out. And this is where all James 4, 11, and 12 really come together. So if you could pull that up again, please. It says this, do not speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing, judging God's law. Again, this is where he's talking about the teacher or the student is greater than the teacher. You're saying, I'm going to put myself in a place that I'm going to be the judge here. I know what's best for me as we read on. But your job is to obey, not to judge if it applies to you. It says, God alone who gave you the law is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? So he ups the ante. At first, he's talking about your fellow brothers and sisters. When he says that, he's talking about the corporate body, fellow Christians, fellow believers. That's what he's talking about. But then at the end, he says, well, what right do you have to even judge the world? What right do you have? You have to understand what is happening here in this passage, because before that, he starts talking about double-mindedness and being in, being out, and just playing a fake Christian kind of deal. And now, because of tension there, and because we know tension really starts to reveal what's in the heart of man. When things are going well, we tend to dismiss things. We tend to just put up with the negativity because, I don't want to go there. But when the negativity really hits us in the heart, that's when you really find out what's really in here. When that pressure begins. And that's what he's beginning to reveal in there. And so double-mindedness begins because there's Jews that are out. They're dealing with this. They're now probably dealing with the tension because they were persecuted then. So there's a lot of tension with persecution. You know, they're trying to adjust to the idea that salvation's for Gentiles too. So that there's that too. All these speculations then begin to chirp, chirp, chirp. But he goes a little deeper than that. James goes a little deeper in what he's trying to say here. Because he's not saying that slander is not just a relational offense. He's saying it shows a heart issue here. When we don't show God's mercy or forgiveness towards somebody who's done us wrong, we then start to allow arrogance and other things to begin to take root. I know what's better. I know what's better. They're wrong. I'm right. And we don't allow ourselves to reflect on anything. And ultimately, we start to play the judge. We start to make our own rules, which is what he was talking about there in James. He's like, you're not better than me. What power, and he starts to talk about the sovereignty of God. And ultimately, when we start playing judge, that's what we do. We take the sovereignty of God away from him to be judge, because now we want to be judge. We know what's best. We're going to take this under our hand. And instead of trying to restore that person, we're here to condemn them. And ultimately, it shows a lack of humility in that season. As strange as it is, just like he said about, hey, when you're offended, hey, understand you might have something there. But our pride stops us from looking into that board. And that is, the big influence is, he's talking about humility. Why? Because in the previous verse, which I don't have in the lineup, it's James 4:10, he says this, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. There is something about humility when we surrender these things over to him. There is something about it, because it then allows him to perform right justice. It allows him to work on even that person who spoke a bad word against you or ridiculed you and just created a bunch of false gossip. He loves them too. And in doing so, when we hit it with the judge, and we start speaking word curses like they'll never amount to anything, they'll never get restored, they are who they are, they're a hypocrite. We don't allow the sovereignty of God to work on their heart. We don't allow that to happen. And that's ultimately what he's saying is, guys, you have to walk in humility. You have to walk in humility in these situations. Because in doing so, it will actually work on you. Because I've seen it in my life. When I surrendered things, God was able to work through it. And he was able to work through it. And I had no idea. How many people have we probably gave up on because of something they did to us? How many of us have? And we short-circuited because we judged them. And so he's like, allow God's sovereignty and justice to work. And allow him to decide. Allow him to decide. This is why he says what he says about, he says, God alone has the power to save or to destroy. Let him decide that. Allow him to work. And allow that to happen. And so that's really the heart of what James is saying is like, look, when we cast judgment, when we cast slander, that's showing we have a heart issue. We are the ones. And he's like, look, you want to become all who you are to be? Show humility in that. Show humility. And allow God to work in that. So if I could have the worship team come up. Perhaps you found yourself today suffering from slander. Perhaps judgment has attacked your heart. And I know that's not always easy. We know wounds happen. But one of the most humbling things you can do in that moment is give it to Jesus. Give that wound to Jesus and surrender it over to him. Know that that's your fellow brother and sister, or possibly someone in the world that, yeah, we want to see them saved. God wants to see them saved. Let that be your heart. Allow God to speak into that person's heart in a tough season that we're facing. And I'm not dismissing what happened to you, but as believers, we're to release those things, because those things, those wounds, those offenses, they seem to just keep regurgitating. As soon as someone speaks of something similar, it regurgitates. And in doing so, it hinders us. And unintentionally, we allow pride to just keep it because we feel it's our right to keep it. And we just basically say, God, you don't know any better. And I'm the one that's going to bring justice. So allow your hearts, and turn it over to Christ. And if that's you today and you need to turn this over, we're going to have, end of service prayer like we always do. I encourage you to release that to God. And in doing so, we're walking in obedience to what God has said is, don't be quick to judge. Don't try to be your own justice. I know the way. There's a reason I'm telling you to do this, because in the end, it's a major benefit to you and possibly the other person.